If you aren't caught up with the Dark Continent arc in Hunter x Hunter's manga, please go do that before watching this video. It's so good, trust me. Now, onto the video. One day, I found myself lying in bed thinking about Hunter x Hunter, normal Friday night stuff, when suddenly I found myself overwhelmed with excitement and anticipation. I remembered that at some point, Ging and Pariston are totally gonna go at it, and it is gonna be glorious. Immediately confronted by the crushing existential dread that comes with thinking about Hunter x Hunter's future, I decided to distract myself with a little thought experiment. What if I came up with a Nen ability for Ging? Not a theory or prediction, just a fun exercise in creativity to fill the void in my heart that only new chapters of Hunter x Hunter could satisfy. So, here it is, my attempt to come up with a fitting ability for everyone's favorite deadbeat dad, Ging Freecss. Before I get started explaining the ability, I should probably establish what we know about Jing's history with Nen so far. First and foremost, there's his Nen type. We don't know what it is. We did see him perform a high-level recreation and evolution of Leorio's emission-based ability, and it could be argued that that would point to him being an enhancer, emitter, or manipulator, but for now, let's just work under the assumption that his Nen type is just a complete mystery. Okay? Okay. So, that being said, I don't want to just arbitrarily come up with a Nen type that fits whatever ability I end up making up for him, so the method I'm going to use is simple. I'm going to do two things. First, take a look at Hisoka's aura-based personality analysis and pick which one I think fits Ging the most. And second, I'm going to use the magical internet to take a few Nen-type personality quizzes and, to the best of my ability, answer them as Ging would. I mean, if we're being honest here, you'd probably hack into the website, steal info on the creators, and use it to send them a gif of Homer Simpson flipping them off, but let's just say a manipulator forced him to take the quizzes. If Hisoka's analysis matches the majority of the quiz results, I'm gonna run with it. If not, then I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Starting off, we've got Hisoka's aura-based personality analysis. To me, Ging clearly fits into specialization, the description of which being independent and charismatic. I mean, that's kinda just a general description of his character. Ging is constantly embarking on solo missions to sate his curiosity, and on the way, he naturally procures friends and admirers just by virtue of his, charisma. He's often hated at the outset for the extent of his independence, yet once most people get to know him, they become friends and colleagues, drawn in by his natural magnetism. While I see it as a pretty clear answer, I'll go over the other types anyway and explain why I don't think they fit him to nearly the same extent. First off is Enhancer, simple and determined. Jing's definitely determined, but I wouldn't exactly call him simple. If he sees a problem, he's more likely to sneakily convince a third party to intervene without them knowing they're intervening, and be on a plane to the other side of the world as the conflict resolves itself exactly according to plan. Next is Manipulator, logical, does things at their own pace. Ging definitely takes things at his own pace, and he does utilize logic on a regular basis to a very high degree, but to me, he seems driven a lot more by his emotions than his logic. When he'd complete a major discovery, he'd care more about the joy of his friends and colleagues rather than the ramifications of his findings. After quelling a conflict he'd started by offering to pay the members of the Dark Continent expedition team, he told them, "Well, I often run my mouth first and come up with the reason why I said it afterwards." He's both motivated and influenced more by his emotions than any sense of concrete logic, making Manipulator a poor fit. Up next, we've got Transmuter, whimsical and a liar. A case could be made for Ging being whimsical, but throughout the story, he pretty much never lies. Sure, he'll abstain from sharing information from time to time, but only out of pragmatism. In general, he's a very honest character, speaking his mind freely without reservation. Next, we've got Emitter, impatient and not detail-oriented. I don't think I need to give this one much time. Ging was happy to wait as long as it took to explore the Dark Continent, and he was detail-oriented enough to basically write the plot of the manga. So, yeah, that one's out. And next up is Conjurer, high-strung. Given that Ging spends most of his time looking like he's just finished inhaling a hearty dose of jazz cabbage, I don't think this one's right for him either. So now that I've finished explaining why Ging fits into specialization according to Hisoka's personality analysis, let's take some quizzes. Alright, I just finished taking 5 Nen tests. 3 of them said Jing's a specialist, 1 said transmuter, and 1 said manipulator. That's what we in the counting business call a majority, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say Jing's a specialist for the sake of this thought experiment. Now, the last thing we need to talk about before getting to the ability at hand is Jing's showings with Nen thus far. We've seen him perform 3 Nen techniques, all of which were the result of a little quirk of his, a self-proclaimed talent he has to imitate punching abilities he's hit with. After copying Leorio's emission-based ability, he creates 2 evolved forms of it, using the emitted aura as a long-range super-powered ultrasound, and then using it to cure cancer. Jeez, what's with Ging and creating monumental advancements in the field of medicine and not doing anything with them? Angel's breath. He also used his Nen off-screen to program a cassette tape to erase itself years after coming into contact with it. Touted as one of the top 5 Nen users in the world by Netero, a hunter who knew what he's talking about, Ging is an absolute genius when it comes to Nen. So now, the moment you've all been waiting for. This is my Nen ability for Ging Freecss. Ability name, Evolution. Nen type classification, Specialization. This power allows Ging to manifest any ability he can conceive of. Now hold on, I know that sounds ridiculously overpowered, and to an extent it is, but just hear me out. A power like this needs a whole lot of conditions and restrictions in order to balance it out, and I believe the essence of this ability lies in its limitations and prerequisites. There are a lot of them, and it might get a little complicated, but I'll try to share it in the simplest terms I can. So here's a list of the central conditions and restrictions. Condition. Before Ging activates an ability, he must first conceive of an evolved application of that ability. If he cannot, or if the evolved application does not meet the following restrictions, he can never use an ability with the same core concepts as the ability he's attempting to activate again. Restriction. An evolved application of an ability must occupy the same Nen category. For example, an evolved form of an enhancement ability must also be an enhancement ability. Restriction. An evolved application of an ability must occupy a different tactical category. For example, an offensive ability cannot be evolved into another offensive ability. The evolved ability could be defensive, supportive, used to improve mobility or perception, etc. Restriction. He can only activate the same ability within an evolution line 3 times. If he uses up all 3 activations of a specific ability, he must use the next line in his evolution. Those are the general conditions and restrictions for when he uses one technique at a time, but what if he wants to use more than that? Here are the conditions and restrictions for when he uses multiple abilities at once. Condition. In order to activate more than one ability at once, Ging must not only conceive of evolutions for the individual abilities before their activation, but also a combination of every technique being used that creates a unique power. The combined ability must use all of the categories of the abilities he's using at the same time. For example, if an emission and manipulation ability are being used, the combined technique must use both emission and manipulation. The combined ability also cannot use the same tactical category as either of the individual abilities. For example, if he's using an offensive and defensive ability, the combined ability cannot be offensive or defensive. It can improve mobility, provide support, be used for reconnaissance, etc. Restriction. When using multiple abilities at once, they cannot be in the same category and have to be next to each other on the aura chart. For example, an emission ability cannot be used at the same time as another emission ability and can be only used in tandem with a manipulation or enhancement-based ability. Restriction. When using multiple abilities, they cannot use the same tactical category. For example, a defensive ability cannot be used at the same time as another defensive ability. Okay, so I know that might have been a lot. Luckily, there's a perfect example of this sequence of evolving techniques in the manga. Let's look back to the time Ging copied and evolved Leorio's ability, and how it followed the conditions and restrictions I highlighted above. So first, Ging activated the core ability, the one Leorio punched him with. Before activating it, he would have conceived of evolving it into a radar. It stayed in the same Nen category, being emission, and became a different tactical category, going from offensive to perceptive. Then, before activating the radar ability, he'd conceived of another evolution. Instead of using the ability to transport his punches like the core ability or sense targets from far away like radar, he used it to shoot his aura as a projectile. It stayed in the same Nen category and became a different tactical category. going from perceptive to offensive. Before using the projectile attack, he would have needed to conceive of another evolution that used emission and wasn't offensive. Then afterwards, when he used radar a second time, that left him with only one more use in the future, with the other two abilities having two left, respectively. These conditions and restrictions apply to any ability in any category, but naturally there have to be a few more specific conditions and restrictions for some of the different Nen categories as well. I'll share those, then get into why I think this ability fits Jing's personality. After all, that's one of, if not the, most important aspects of Nen. So let's start with manipulation. In order to manipulate an object, Ging first must conceive of an evolved application for that object that fulfills a different role than its original intended purpose. For example, if he wanted to manipulate a gun, he could come up with a design for a machine that, using the gun as a base, shoots out a viscous liquid that would hinder the mobility of its targets. It would have gone from being an offensive deadly weapon to a defensive tool that impairs an opponent's movements. He can also only manipulate any given object 3 separate times, and the effects of his manipulation only last for up to an hour. When it comes to manipulating people, Ging can only influence aspects of them that he can predict. For instance, if he knew someone was going to make a specific action before they did it, he could manipulate them to stop or do the opposite. He cannot fully control anyone, only manipulate certain actions, and the effects of his manipulation only last for up to an hour. Again, he can only manipulate any individual up to 3 times. Also, as an added condition, before manipulating a person's actions, Ging must first construct a plan that would have helped the target fulfill whatever goal they had while attempting their action. If Ging fails to complete any of the conditions or restrictions listed above, his ability fails and he can never manipulate the target of his ability again. Next up is Transmutation. In order to transmute his aura into a substance, Ging must have a deep understanding of said substance's chemical and structural makeup. He also doesn't automatically have immunity to said substance, so he couldn't turn his Nen into, say, lava without putting himself at serious risk. Lastly is Conjuration. In order to conjure something, Ging must have an in-depth understanding of what he's creating. He couldn't just vaguely decide to make a gun, he'd need to know the materials, structures, and physics used to make it function. Same goes for the evolved ability. He'd need to know exactly how and why it works, or the ability fails and he can never conjure that thing again. That just about sums up his ability, so now it's time to explain why I think it fits Ging as a character, both from an audience perspective and from his in-universe reasoning. What I want is always the same, something I don't have. Ging is constantly pushing forward and evolving, never stagnating. He gains new experiences and friends with each goal he pursues, and the scope of his achievements only grow, mirroring the way his ability gains new facets and powers every time it's used. And just as the things he wants evolve and change, his abilities do as well. Just as he refuses to be sated by past achievements, his ability only lets him reuse the same ability up to 3 times. It forces him to, just as he does in life, constantly move forward to new things. Jing's adaptable and flexible, reading the flow of events and controlling that flow in his favor. Just as he's able to control practically every situation he's in, his ability allows him to control every Nen category as he sees fit. He has pride in his ability to control that which he understands, and his ability is no different. So that brings us to the in-universe reasons he'd have this ability. I'd guess that, similar to Netero, at some point he became bored with fighting people that posed no challenge to him. So in order to keep things fun, his ability made any Nen battle a game against himself, challenging him to constantly come up with newer, more advanced abilities, while keeping his opponent's abilities and tactics in mind. I'd guess that it had been a while since there were any high stakes for him, so he added his own stakes, putting the abilities he'd created on the line for the sake of an exciting challenge. So yeah, that's the ability I made for Ging. If you'd like me to come up with more abilities for characters with unknown Nen, let me know. This has been Evan. Thank you for watching. I'd like to give a gigantic thank you to Mr. S for sticking with me on Patreon through this time of me not really uploading many videos. I have some news, which is that I will actually be deleting my Patreon. For a while, I've been approaching YouTube as something that I hope to make money off of in the future, and to be honest, that kind of eroded my enjoyment of the whole process. So I'm gonna stop doing that. I'm gonna totally just make videos when I want, have fun with it. There's not going to be a schedule. I'm just going to be constantly working on things and putting them out when I'm ready, when they're done. And that'll hopefully allow me to do more bigger projects, kind of like this, or just branch out, try new things that I haven't done before. I might do some what ifs. I'll do some more analysis. I'll do some more things like this, like creative exercises, whatnot. Yeah, so thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate all of you for sticking around and watching my stuff. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.